Color makes up a huge part of all of your photo edits, and even in any kind of art form we're doing, whether it's painting, graphic design, color is so important. And there's loads of things out there on color theory, what colors to use and stuff, but often when you jump into editing a photo in Lightroom, one of the hardest panels I find to use when I was first getting started was the HSL sliders. Purely because within the HSL sliders you have all of your different colors and the ability to change the hue, the saturation and the luminance, so how bright or dark it is. And that can be really overwhelming because this is a delicate blend. The same way as if you take all of these different colors of paint, put them in one place and start to take a paintbrush and dip in each one, you're going to create a mess very, very quickly because you might not necessarily know what colors blend together or what should you actually be doing in the first place within your photo. Color goes a long way within composition. Having too much color in your image can very quickly overwhelm and confuse the viewer, so they don't actually know where to look. Likewise, going the opposite direction and not having much color can look really dull, it can look boring, unless it's minimalistic and that's what you're going for. Take this photo here, for example. This is a house that I shot over in Iceland, and I just took this photo because I think I was overwhelmed by the colors at the time and also felt it posed a nice challenge. You can see here, there is loads of different colors going on in the graffiti that we have on the sides, but not just there. Look at the building next to it as well. You have these very bright sort of aqua green and red going on next to it, and your eye quite doesn't know what to make sense of all of this. Now, it doesn't help at the top we have a lot of white space too, so a first edit we might want to do is just crop down and really focus in on what we want to do with this. But for today we're not going to do any of the full edits, we're purely just going to use this image as an example to go over how we might approach using the HSL sliders. So if that sounds interesting, stick around and let's get into it. Now, I've done a quick little edit to this. All I've done is some basic exposure settings, a bit of a clarity boost and a vibrancy boost, because these are the general things I would do before I approach the HSL sliders. One other thing up here then is the tone curve. Now, if I just toggle on and off the tone curve quickly here, you can see that actually the colors don't look as saturated. Remember that when you're playing around with the tone curve, you are also playing around with saturation. Introducing contrast here also introduces the saturation, which is why you can see these colors get brighter as the image becomes more contrasted. We do have this slider down here to refine saturation, so if I pull this down, you can see that becomes less saturated then. So we still have the contrast, but we're not affecting the colors as much. Depending on your workflow, you can do one of two things. You could leave the tone curve alone and focus on the sliders first. I would avoid doing that until you get familiar with what exactly you're trying to do with the HSL sliders. Instead, what you can do is just put your tone curve in so you're happy with your contrast or any additional colors you want to introduce into the image. And then you can come up here and refine the saturation just to reduce it down a bit. You may also notice as well, I have my calibration not at the bottom, but up here, because this is something I generally come and do afterwards. We won't go over calibration today, but you can find more videos about that on the channel. So as we come into the HSL sliders, I like to have mine on all, which means I can just see everything that I've got open here for me to play around with. And the first thing I would really do is have a look at all the colors in the image and try and pick out what are my key colors going to be here. I quite like the blues that are going in here. There's a lot of aqua as well. So what I might try and do is basically refine the blues down and unify them a bit more. And then we also have a lot of yellows, oranges and reds. So what I think I'm going to go down and do is basically unify all the cools and then unify all of the warm colors as well. And hopefully that will give us a really nice contrast between the two different sets of colors there, which is a great place to start in your image. Granted, every image is going to have different colors and different things in them, but being able to unify certain tones together can really help pull the picture in so it looks like everything belongs there. So I'm first of all just going to go up and tackle my hues. Now, if you're not sure what the colors are, we can use point color, which is where we can select a certain place and refine the saturation, the hues and the luminance from all of that. But let's just have a look at these sliders here as well, where we could also select from here and we can click on a color and see where that's going to be. So if I click over on these sort of green yellows and I just pull these down and up, we can see that this is the yellow and the green sliders. Now what I'm simply going to do is actually just pull these up and down until my eye sees the thing that looks better. And that is very subjective, but I don't like these greens that are coming out. If I pull this down, I much prefer this towards the orange hues that we have there then. So I'm not going to go quite down as far as that at the moment. Next, I'm going to pick one of these aqua colors and do very much a similar thing here. So I'm going to pick the aqua color that's just up here. Again, drag that down and see which end I prefer that. So this becomes quite green, and you can see that I'm also affecting the roof next to it as well. Now I much prefer the blue purple side of this. So I'm just going to boost that slightly. After that, I'm going to go up and have a look at the channels that weren't hit with my selections here. So the first one is the orange one. So I'm just going to have a look if I drag that up and down as well. How does this end up? So I can bring in more red into the image, or I can bring in more of the orange. Now I'm being aware that this is also affecting the house next to it, and I don't really want much of a cherry type vibe to that. But I am preferring pushing this towards the red side. So I'm going to push this towards the red side for the minute, and I'm going to counteract that by the red. I'm going to pull up towards the orange slightly. So this is a trick you can do a lot to unify the colors. When you've got two colors adjacent to each other here, you can pull one in one direction of the hue and one in the other. You're pushing then, in this case, both the red and the orange more towards the same hue. So that's going to help to unify those colors there. So now that I've pulled that red up, you can see that we've lost some of the red in the house, and we've lost some of the red in here, which means I can now pull my orange and be a bit more aggressive with this towards the red side, just to get that more natural looking red back in the image. But now it looks, if I turn this on and off, it looks like the warm colors are more, there's less yellow going on, there's less green going on. We've more unified this down into like a red tone here. So now I want to go back over to my blues and just have a look at a similar thing. Purple, if I just drag the slider up and down, there's very little going on, but there are little parts of it appearing. You can see down here, there's some of it appearing. And again, I'm just going to use my eye and decide, do I want to introduce some purple into the image or not? And right now, I would say I'm actually struggling to decide either way, because I like the little purple pops that are coming in. I think it adds to the artwork a little, whereas if I pull it down, we're unifying the blues a bit more. So both look quite nice in my eyes. I'm just going to keep the purple in that case, because I can always decide to take it out later. Magenta as well, if I put all the magenta up and down, is not doing a great deal, which means I'm just going to leave it alone for the moment. So now I'm just going to go back up to my blues and refine these a bit more. Just make sure we still have a blue tone in there and not full purple. So let's just toggle that on and off. This was our before image, and your eyes can now, after being used to seeing the changes we've made, actually see how cluttered the colors look. And they may not have looked that cluttered when you first viewed the photo, but now that we pull this on, we can see that the warm side, those reds have taken over quite a lot. But if we look at the difference with the house next to it, the red and the green there are only slightly different, but not too much. So this is a method that I find works well when you're first approaching HSL sliders and you're not quite sure what to do. Now your image may have very limited color in, and you may know what you want to do already, but when you're approached with something like this and it's very overwhelming, you need to work out actually what does your eye like and where do you want to go with this. Now some of you may want to go in different directions to what I've put in. That's absolutely fine, because a lot of photography is subjective anyway. But it's finding a workflow and method that works for you. And this one works for me here. Now the next step would be to go down and actually look at the saturation and start to pull some of these colors out that we've changed the hues on, and work out what are the colors here we really want to focus on. So again, this bit in the middle is just looking still just slightly too messy for my liking. So what I'm going to do is grab my greens, because I can see there's some green hues in there. But again, I could take the pointer here and find what color this might be. But I'm going to pull the greens just down on saturation, because this is the color that's kind of sat in the middle of my warms and my cool tones, and it's a color that can be very distracting. If I boost that up, you see it just adds to the yellowness that's in there, and it just doesn't quite look right to me. So I'm going to pull the saturation of the greens down until I'm happy with how this bit in the middle here looks. Blues is definitely a color I want to focus on, so I'm going to boost the saturation of my blues and a little bit of the aquas. And then the oranges and reds is another color I want to focus on too. So if I pull my oranges up, remember my oranges have quite a red tone to them anyway now, but I feel like it's covering more of the spectrum of colors here. So I'm going to focus in on the oranges and the reds not as much, because if I go too far on the reds, I'm actually affecting this house then over to the side. So blue and the orange are going to be the two that I'm going to boost up there. The yellow then, if I look to desaturate that down, you can see that kind of unifies and clears things up a little bit more, but we're actually losing some of the life out of the warm tones as well. So I'm going to pull this down slightly, but not go too far with it. Purples and the magentas then. So the magentas weren't really doing too much, but the purple, we had that little bit up at the top. So this is really where I will now decide, because I couldn't when I was doing the hues, do I want the purple or not? So I'm going to desaturate the purples, see what that looks like, and then fully saturate them. And I can see all these little highlighted bits coming through. Now, personally, I quite like it. I think it's just that added little pop to the image that's going on here. Otherwise, it can start to look too unified and too bland. Just by boosting these purples, I've decided I like how that looks. I think it adds to the artwork that's here. So I'm actually going to boost these up slightly. So let's just toggle that on and off now that we've dealt with some of the saturation. And again, going back to the before here, this just feels so messy, but it's because our eyes have adjusted to these changes that we've made. Now, the final thing we want to do then is the luminance. So this is how bright or dark we want something to be. So again, if I pull the blues all the way down and all the way up, you can see it affects the light and the brightness of them. My rule with this is, what are the colors I want to pop? So generally I'll have colors that I'm not as interested in, darker and more muted out. Colors that I want to be more present in my photos, I will have brighter, because again, that's to draw the eye in to relate to these colors more than the other ones. So straight away, we've already said we've got the oranges, we've got the blues, and now we've got potentially a purple here as well. So first of all, I'm just going to pull the oranges up, and you can see that that's now highlighting out, and it's breaking it apart from those red tones a little bit. And it's just giving a little bit of a highlight to the colors, which I quite like. The green I still find quite distracting, so I'm going to darken that one down slightly. And then the blues, as I pull them up as well, you can see where that's affecting. Now I want these blues to be fairly present, so I'm just going to boost them up, and I'm going to pull the aqua with them as well. The purple, I'm going to go both ways and see which way I prefer. I feel like boosting that slightly as well, just to make it pop out. And actually I want to go back up and add a little bit more saturation in the purples. And again, that is fine to do. You don't have to go hue, saturation, luminance, and that's it. As you change these sliders, you may want to go back up, and it may influence your decision to tweak something else. That's fine to do. Just don't get too carried away with it, because that's when you end up moving away from your vision and you start to lose what you had on the photo. So I'd always recommend that when you've done this set of sliders, go away and edit another photo, go away, have a break, come back and look at it, and do the colors still look right to you? Do they still look like what you wanted them to be? Because our eyes, as you've seen, can very quickly adjust to the changes that we're doing here. So if I toggle on and off again, how you view this photo now is probably less than how you viewed it at the start when I first showed it unedited. So finally, let's just check out our yellows. I'm just going to pull the yellows up and down. I find that's quite distracting, bringing the yellows up like that to highlight those bits out. Those spots just don't look quite right. But equally, if I go down, also doesn't look quite right. But I'm feeling more towards the darker side just to help unify that out a bit more again. And I'll probably just boost those oranges and red slightly more, but I'm still wary of that house next to it. And then I'm just going to push those purples up a little bit more. Those purples have really grown on me here. So now let's toggle on and off the final thing. We can see before it was a mess of all different types of hues, particularly a lot of green, a lot of yellows going on in here. And those two colors are quite close to each other already, but there's also a lot of blues, purples. There's just so much color going on in this image. What we've done is unified the colors more. We've unified the warmer tones and the cooler tones, but we've also decided what colors do we want to focus on after we've done that unification there. And those colors you want to focus on, you increase the saturation, you increase the luminance of. The ones you don't want to focus on, you pull down. A really easy example to start with it is to find something that's more that teal and orange style, where you've just got an image that's mostly blue, but maybe with a little pop of orange in there. These are great examples where you can see you want to pull the blues down, boost the luminance of the orange, just because that becomes your subject. Now, once I've done all of this, I would then go up and do some calibration work just to fine tune these colors a little bit more, but we won't go over this in the video. What you might want to do then is, if you've refined your saturation from your tone curve, you might want to go back up to this slider and just have a play around with that. And again, just find the right level of saturation that you've got coming out of that tone curve too. Once you've done all your final edits and bits, you can then come back up and play around with the vibrance a little bit more, or play around with the saturation slider for a global effect. Generally, I tend to avoid globally changing the saturation on these types of images unless I'm going for something really moody, and then in that case I will pull the saturation or the vibrancy down on everything to help get a moody vibe. But even if I pull the vibrancy down and I come back down here and mute all my colors, you can still see it looks unified. So I hope that's helped you to understand my approach to the HSL sliders here and just how important it is to have a workflow and understand these images when you're trying to play around with this. If you're ever in Iceland, take a photo of this house, it will help you out a lot. Otherwise, see if you can find photos that are crowded with different types of colors. Pictures in libraries can work well where you've got books that are all different types of colors, and trying to unify them together, that will give you some good practice and help you just understand this workflow a bit more. Either way, I hope this has helped you. Like, subscribe, all the usual, and I'll see you in the next one.